Hello! I'm back at home because it's reading week. I read a lot of books in the month of September because I'm taking an English class, and then I rediscovered my love for reading and I just couldn't stop reading until I started doing my assignments. But anyways, I read a lot of books in September and I wanted to make a video about it because I also recently got into book talk. I read 5 books and 1 really long poem. For the spoilers of this video, I'm gonna put a little spoiler alert thingy. The closest thing I've ever done to making a book review video was these reading journals that we did in grade school, where we would read a book and then we would write a summary about the book. One of my teachers in grade 7 saw that I read so many books and wrote so many reading journals that he pulled me aside and he was like, oh, if my son was the same age as you, I would tell him to marry you. And that's really weird, but anyways, we're gonna cut back to the video that I refilmed this intro for. Hope you enjoy. Hi friends. Hi mom. It's my penguin. First book I read over the summer, I listened to the audiobook of The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. So I did read one of the little stories in grade 11 literature club in high school, and I found the audiobook on Spotify and I really had nothing to listen to on my way to work, so I was like, I'll just listen to this book. I gave this book 3.5 stars, a book that's told by the perspective of Dr. Watson, and he kind of just tags along on these adventures with Sherlock Holmes. This book contains a bunch of different mysteries. Each one, you don't really need to know the one from before to understand the next story, and they're very short. So I think this would make a really good bedtime story. A lot of the mysteries didn't really make that much sense to me. The one with the snake dangles down from the ceiling and then bites someone, and then they lure the snake back with a pot of milk. But snakes don't drink milk, right? I think. So I was kind of like, that didn't really make sense to me, but it was still fun to read. I also really liked all of the characters. Sherlock Holmes is like this really smart dude who's really good at solving mysteries. He doesn't do it for the money, and he kind of just does it for the fun of solving the mystery, and I think that makes the book really interesting and fun to read. I do recommend this for everyone who's in this kind of like, I kind of want to read but not really. This is really fun and easy, so you should read it if you're trying to get back into reading. Next book I read was Think Like a Monk. I read this back in my self-help era when I was reading all of these self-help books. I also listened to this on the audiobook on the train to work. I gave this book 2.75 stars. I feel like I rate books pretty low, but to me a 2.5 stars an okay book. It was still funnish to read, but I wouldn't really recommend it, and it wasn't hard to get through. So 2.75 might seem really low, but in my opinion it's like better than the average book. Anyways, this is probably my favorite self-help book. The author didn't really seem full of himself, whereas other self-help books I read, it kind of felt like they were forcing their ideas onto you, whereas this one was kind of just presenting things he learned along the way of becoming a monk, things he observed in real life, and you're invited to think about these things, participate if you're interested in it. It did take a bit of concentration to listen to concepts, but for me a lot of these concepts that they talked about in the book I already really believe in and do my best to live by, so it wasn't anything really mind-blowing. Next thing I read was Howell. This is a poem, a really long poem, and it was a poem I had to read for my English class that I'm taking in university. I actually really like this class. Maybe I'll make a video talking about how much I like this class. Did I tell you how much I rated this book? This poem? 2.5. It's a good poem. Personally, I don't like poems, so maybe that's why I rated it really low, but I think if you're gonna read a poem that you want to feel something, read this poem. This poem is about capitalism and how a lot of the people he sees as the greatest people of his era are losing their sparkle and losing themselves to the society. At the end, it's kind of hopeful, so it's kind of nice. Just be aware it is a little bit graphic. It is a very good poem though. I do recommend you read it. This is a very long poem I read, and normally for me, I don't read that much of things that are hard to read. I don't think that makes sense. I can't really understand things that aren't modern English, so poems are especially hard for me to understand. But reading this poem, I kind of got what the author was trying to say. Honestly, even though I didn't understand maybe 60% of it, I still felt really uncomfortable. A lot of the concepts that they talk about in the poem are really graphic. So I did have to take breaks reading this poem. I think I stopped about 3 times to kind of collect myself and calm myself down. One funny thing, not funny, but strange thing, was that I searched up this poem on YouTube, and while I was listening to it, the audience was actually laughing at the person reading the poem. And in my mind, I was like, why are you laughing? I don't see how this poem can be funny to you. Maybe they're laughing at the language, but it didn't sound like an uncomfortable type of laughter, which is what maybe I thought that would be the only reason why you would laugh. But it is a very good poem. It's a good poem. On to the next one. Next, I read The Shawshank Redemption for school again, and I love this book. I gave it 4 stars out of 5. The narrator of this book is Red, who has been in prison since he was very young, like 20-something. He sees this new guy coming in, his name's Andy, and Andy's not like your typical inmate, you know? He still has that sparkle in his eyes. He's building a life for himself in prison. He fights back, is able to kind of get what he wants, and Red really admires Andy. Andy's a really respectable guy. I read this every night before I went to bed. I read this when I woke up, whenever I had time, until I finished it, and I did cry at the end. So if you like a good cry, read this book. It's a really good book. This book does take place in a prison, so it's like an unfamiliar environment, but they talk about a lot of real world issues, such as the abuse of power and authority, consent conditioning humans, and a lot of other things. I also loved all the characters. Actually, not all the characters, but the 2 main characters, like Red and Andy. They weren't aggressive or anything. They were pretty respectable. I can't say respectable. They were pretty good characters. Definitely read it. I think it's very worth your time. Please read the book, it's so good. Next book I read, I'm so happy that I read this book. It is Before the Coffee Gets Cold, and I think everybody on BookTube has been talking about this book, so I'm probably really late, but that is where I found out about this book. It was free on this month's Amazon Prime Reading. Oh yeah, funny thing about Amazon Prime Reading, because this is the first time I've ever used it, they put the little time on the bottom of the page of how many minutes left, and I thought that was how much time you had left for each chapter. Each chapter, it would start from 60 minutes and it'd go down to 1, and I was like racing myself trying to finish the chapter before I ran out of time. But it's not how much time left you have to read the chapter, it's how much time you think you have left until you finish the chapter. Anyways, I rated it 4.5 stars. It's a very short book and very autumny, very comfy, I got my little glass of tea or mug of tea, whatever you put your tea in. Got your little blanket, really cozy fuzzy blanket. You're sitting by this fire, or you're sitting by a window and the autumn leaves outside are orange and just falling on the ground. That kind of cozy vibes. You probably know about this book. It's about this little coffee shop in a basement that can take you back into time, and it goes through a few stories of people who have gone back to time and how it changes. You're kind of going through these people's lives, things that you regret, and then them trying to fix it. I cried 3 times reading this book. It was very worth crying for. I felt like nostalgic, even though I don't know if that was intentional. It's really short, it's really fun. Please read it. Next book I read again for English class was The Body. I was very disappointed with this book because it's in the same book of series called The Four Seasons with The Shawshank Redemption, and because I love The Shawshank Redemption, I thought I was gonna love The Body. But no, I had such a hard time getting through this book. I rated it a 1.5 stars, but I really didn't like it. I'm sorry, I know a lot of people like it. Goodreads gives it like a 4.07 star rating. It's probably just not the book for me. It's a journey story of these 4 boys who are pretty young. I think they're in grades 6 or 7. They're 13. They hear about this boy their age who died after getting hit by the train, and they go out to try to find the body of this boy who died in the forest. The whole book, maybe like 80% of it, is them walking in the forest. I was very bored. One thing that I really didn't like was the dialogue and the slang that they used. It just made me really uncomfortable because it was so aggressive. Every other word was like a swear word, and they were using it to talk about other people. Even after finishing reading the book, I just could not get used to the dialogue and the slang that they were using. I also was not a fan of the writing style. It was easy to understand, but I was not really a big fan of the whole jumping in from the future to put in future Gordon's thoughts on his past. I kind of get that it's the point. It's kind of like a memoir and you're reflecting back on what happened to you as a child. You're traumatized. You kind of have some time to think about it now that you're writing about it. I also had mixed feelings when he would tell stories because Gordy, so young Gordy, when he would be telling his friends, it would be dialogue and then it would cut in with a published version of the story. I kind of like it because there's no interruptions and I could really immerse myself in this short story. But then I also didn't like it because it put a pause on the overall bigger story. Or at least for me, I felt the flow wasn't really there. I had to stop this bigger story to really get immersed in the smaller story, which both stories were really good. I enjoyed both of them very much. More than the overall story. The constant interruptions just kind of made my head hurt, I'm not gonna lie. Maybe because I don't read that much. The part I did like, besides the 2 short stories, was the ending when Gordon is in his present self. He kind of talks about where everyone landed, such as him and Chris went to college. Chris was becoming a lawyer, I think. Gordon became a writer. I honestly was really happy that Chris went to college. And when he got stabbed at was it a gas station, or when he got stabbed at the little whatever he was buying in line, I was a little bit sad because Chris was my favorite character. But then again, I didn't really like any of the characters, I'm sorry. I really wish I liked this book because a lot of people did on Goodreads. Part of me is like, maybe I just missed the point. I also haven't talked about it in class yet, so maybe I'll get the point in this upcoming week when we talk about it in class. That's all I have to say about this book. I just did not like it. I'm sorry. Would I recommend this book? If you're like me and you like the type of books I like, then no. If you like where you're more into the journey and not the destination, revealing what the setting, the environment's like through dialogue, through talking, you would probably like this book. If you like reading about internal conflicts with what you think you should do and what society tells you to do, this book does that really well. You would probably really like this book. And if you like flashbacky type of things, this book has a lot of that. You would probably like this book. Conclusion. I didn't write a little bullet point thing for my conclusion. I don't know what to say. These are all the books I read. I'm really happy I read them because now I'm back into reading, so maybe I'll make some better reading content in the future, I hope, if I get the hang of this. Thank you for watching, if you're still here. Bye bye.